Terry, where were you born?
Here in Sydney at Crown Street Women's Hospital in 1936, 5th of March.
And where did you grow up?
Well, I didn't move very far from here. At that stage, at that time, my parents were living in... I was living at the time.
Yeah.
My parents.
And where did you grow up?
Well, my parents, when I was born, my parents were living in Flinders Street, only a few blocks from here. And then about 1938, late 38, early 39, we moved into this house. And since that time, I've been living here most of my life, apart from 10 years.
That's Ann Street Surry Hills?
Surry Hills, yes, 92 Ann Street. So all in all, there's been a glebe in this house since about into 1938.
Oh gosh. And so what are your earliest memories?
I suppose sitting on the kitchen table, one of the teenage girls from just a few houses from here would be getting me ready to take me to the movies. And the earliest picture I can remember at that stage would have been The Wizard of Oz. So it was up at West Theatre, which is now the Academy Cinema at Bellinghurst, and that used to be, as I remember, about sixpence in. And it used to be, when I got into my early years, when I started going on my own, Saturday afternoon special was 3 cereals, 6 cartoons, and 1 movie for sixpence.
Yeah.
They were the good days.
Yeah.
If you had the sixpence. Because the problems here, I suppose, in the late 30s, early 40s, was essentially money was scarce. And although it looks good from our time now, it's so cheap to go places, but the money wasn't all that readily available.
What kind of a kid were you?
I suppose for Surry Hills in those days, which was considered to be very much if not quite a slum area, at least a working class area, very quiet, somewhat shy. A lot of my friends were a little more boisterous and outgoing, into gangs and all that kind of thing, but my parents were very concerned that I did not take part in gangs, and as it turned out, that was a pretty good idea. But I suppose for the most part, fairly quiet.
And why do you say it was a good idea that you weren't part of the gang?
Well, a number of my friends ended up in trouble with the police. They were certainly well known, and I can remember one time in Crown Street School, which is just on the other side of this block here, there was a fire in one of the classrooms was burnt down, and I was sitting on top of the incinerator watching the activities, and I must have been observed, and that particular night the police came around, and fortunately my parents were able to prove that I had not been there at the time, and I was out at baseball with my father. He was a Canadian by birth, and played a lot of...
And you'd been to baseball?
Well, my father was a Canadian, and he was very much into baseball here, especially in the war years. And at that age I was sort of tagged along with my parents, or rather I was taken along with my parents, and that particular afternoon I was observed that I had been there, but we had already just come home, and I'd raced up to see what was going on, so they were able to establish that I could not have been there to start the fire, which is very nice. I had very vivid memories of sitting on the kitchen table while these big burly policemen, well, big to me at the time, were almost cross-examining me, I suppose. But my father was involved with the Police Boys Club down at East Sydney, so it didn't take long to sort things out.
And when they talk about the gangs, they just gang. You're talking about the kid gangs rather than the razor gangs.
Not the big gangster gangs, no.
And that would be just kids sort of... Well, what would they get up to?
Well, they'd sort of have their own areas, like the crowd of us from around here, especially the boys, used to go down to East Sydney Police Boys Club in Woolloomooloo. And that involved going down along Riley Street, which was considered to be a relatively safe area. But if any of the Surry Hills mob, which we were considered to be, strayed into Woolloomooloo mob area, apart from Riley Street, then we would have a fight on our hands, as a few of the group of kids I grew up with found out. And it was just kid stuff more than anything, that they had their territory. There was nothing like you see in the movies these days, like switchblades or knives or knuckle dust or anything like that. It was just a usual sort of fisticuffs thing, and get back to where you belong. Simple as that.
And were the Woolloomooloo kids considered to be wilder than the Surrey Hill kids, or what was the sort of status there?
I don't know about wilder, but they were considered to be just different. And trying to think back into that time, gosh. We just simply saw ourselves as just Surrey Hills, and they were Woolloomooloo, and that's all there was to it. And some of the kids did go to school together, like Crown Street or down at Darlinghurst, and that was, I suppose there's some links there, but they're pretty much the same sort of kids, I think.
And how old were the kids that you're talking about? Were you when you were going down Riley Street, and what age are you talking about there?
Probably round about 8 through to 16, 17 maybe. And the age I'm talking about, I would have been around about the age group of about 8 to 12, and considered to be one of the little kids who just tagged along and did as you were told. Simple as that. Yeah. But once I got into that 12 to 13 group, especially, my parents made sure that they kept pretty good tags on me, I think. Made sure I didn't get too involved with something serious. And some of them did.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I have a younger brother, 4 years younger than me. He lives in Rose Bay at the moment. As I remember, he's a bugger of a kid. But then most young brothers or sisters are anyway.
Well, what kind of a place was Surrey Hills for kids? Say, you would remember the early 40s, wouldn't you? The first half of the 40s.
Yeah, I have some fairly strong memories about it, I suppose. Very quiet in this area. Crown Street, which is just, as I said, behind that row of houses there. Crown Street was a relatively busy area. The trams ran along there both ways, which is now just a one-way street. This is Ann Street, where I live, is a cul-de-sac, and there would be very little in the way of traffic up through here. We used to have scooter races or barrow races straight down the hill across Riley Street, and you just plonk some kid down on the corner of Riley Street and Ann Street there and see if there were cars were coming, and 99% of the time there wouldn't be a car in sight. So you just take off from the top of the hill all the way down. That was interesting.
Yeah.
But there weren't many cars around those days. It was unusual to see cars zipping along, and you had the street pretty much yourself.
I would have thought that during the war period, when you had all the Americans and their jeeps and people rushing around doing important military sort of things, that
Well, not here so much. Crown Street, Oxford Street, just a few blocks from here out to the showground, which was a staging area. Yeah, they were pretty busy, as I remember, but not around here. It was pretty quiet. The house here, of course, was very busy, always alive with Americans, because my father, being Canadian, and he lived in the States for quite a few years, was working at Cockatoo Island at the time. He was a crane driver over there, and lots of American ships in, lots of American sailors, always Americans in this house. It's always busy, lots of parties going on. So I knew what the Americans were like. As I said, lots of parties, lots of sing-alongs, and my mother worked also at the American club down in Pitt Street at the time, near what is the Waterboard now. And I can vaguely remember going down there once or twice when I was about 9 or 10, 8 or 9, just to pop in, and kids in those days could walk the streets without too much worry at all.
Well, what sort of a family do you come from? You said your father was Canadian. What brought him here?
Adventure more than anything, as far as I can find out. Around about 18 or 19, he took off from Saskatchewan, in the back blocks of Saskatchewan, and went down to Chicago, and then made his way to the west coast of the States, San Francisco, I believe, and just worked his way out here on a tramp steamer. When he saw what it was like, he thought, this is God's own country. Midwinter here is pretty much like midsummer over there, and he said, this is it, he's staying. He just loved it. And he got here around about 1926 or 27, from what I can gather. And then the Depression hit not long after that, and he met my mother, who was down here from the country, over in a house in Redfern. And they just gradually got to know each other and finally married in 35, and I came along in 36. But he was pretty much a knockabout kind of guy. He didn't have much in the way of qualifications, and he ultimately started going to night school and then gained himself some engineering certificates and so on, and worked his way up. But as I remember him telling me, for quite a few years he worked on first of all on the steam trains, first as the guy shoveling the coal into the furnaces. Then when he got his certificates, he began to drive trains about all over New South Wales. But once he married, he decided it was about time to settle down to something more locally. And from what I gather, he was working in building industries at the time, first as a dogman, and then again more certificates, and then as a crane driver. And when the war broke out in 1941, I suppose, when the Americans got involved, he was told he couldn't join up. He was in a protective industry, and he had to go and work at Cockatoo Island as a crane driver there right throughout the war. His attitude was essentially he was too young in the hide for the first war and too old in the head for the second one. But from what I gather, he did more than his share over there. He just didn't talk about it. Yeah.
Well, what sort of things were happening over at Cockatoo Island?
Well, I don't remember too much about that. I only went there once when we were all invited to a launch in one of the corvettes at the time that were being built at Cockatoo Island. But it was very much a repair yard for mostly American ships and some Australian ships that got involved with the Japanese up in the Solomons and all that area up around the southeast Pacific area, southwest Pacific. And he would. They were. One story I always remember him telling was one particular night after the Battle of the Coral Sea. The American ship was in for repairs, and they were doing some blasting over near Gore Bay, I believe. And no one had told them about it, and he said, "You never saw guns manned so fast in all your life," because still was the possibility of Japanese attack here. Yeah, so he seemed to have done quite a bit. He just didn't talk about it.
Yeah. And how would you describe your family? Were they working people or?
Oh, well, I would say pretty much working class people. You know what my father did, but my mother worked mainly in factories. At one stage she was working in the factory at IXL, which I'm not sure where that was, somewhere up around Redfern Way, somewhere over Newtown Way. And then in my early teens she was working at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. She was the head chef there. And that was the end of her working years there until ultimately around about 1960 thereabouts, I would think. But essentially working class. My mother came from farming people. She was born in Wangaratta, and I always like the story about that because her father was a roving shearer and just toured up around the Darling River area all the time, and finally decided to settle down at Leeton. And my grandmother and her 5 kids, 4 at that time, she just packed up the dray and took the kids up to Leeton on her own, which I always find absolutely mind-boggling for those days. It's real pioneer stuff. And they were in Leeton there working, had a small farm and did dried fruits and all that kind of thing for the Leeton cannery. And my grandfather didn't like that idea too much, so he took up an allotment in a place called Tabita, which is about 15 miles west of Griffith, and went into wheat and sheep farming. And my cousin still has the farm. And I spend 2 weeks in every January going down there to help out with the shearing. I don't shear. They could never pay me enough to shear. That is hard work. I'm just sort of a rouseabout there for 2 weeks. It's a nice break.
Yeah. How would you describe your mother? You said that she worked, and what sort of a woman was she?
During those growing up years, I suppose, my recollections are essentially a very mild woman, a woman who was quiet. Liked to have a good time going out with my dad, but he was more into going out with the boys than anything. But from what I gather, they went to balls a lot, and particularly in the war years, because with baseball particularly, and also working the dockyard, he was always involved with Americans. There were also always balls going on or dances going on, and she liked to have a good time, liked to go out dancing, all that kind of thing.
Where would these balls and dances be at?
Petersham Town Hall seems to stick very much in my mind. A lot of baseball evenings were there, and what was it, Surreyville, I think, was a dance hall in City Road, and the one out in Paramatta Road at almost at Petersham there, Leichhardt. Not Surreyville, the Albert Palais, was it? I can't quite remember. I think it was the Albert Palais. And also the Trocedero. That seemed to be a very popular area if you go dancing. And she liked that kind of thing, but working 5 days a week, very long hours in factories, and looking after 2 kids and a husband, those days are pretty tough, I think.
Were your parents religious?
No. My mother had a Catholic upbringing, but her experiences with the nuns in various Catholic schools in the country areas seemed to have been pretty rugged, and she sort of broke away from that. My father was totally atheistic. There's no concept of God, it's just absolute garbage. And his experiences during the Depression years, particularly where he saw a lot of people, again from stories he told me, confiding in priests, for example, who would pass information on to the police, which how true that is I don't know, but they were very strong memories of his that he passed on to me.
Well, were they active politically?
My mother, no. My father, in many ways, yes. He was very much involved in the labour movement. He was very keen on the labour movement. Certainly no way would he ever vote Liberal, always strong Labour Party man. A man who went along to meetings, I believe. How far he got involved into the actual labour movement, I don't know. My brother was to become very strong in the labour movement much later, and ended up as the General Secretary of the Waterboard Workers' Union. So he did pretty well.
What sort of discipline was used at home?
Mum was fairly easygoing. Dad could be very strict, and at times, if you stepped out of line, you ended up in the corner very quickly.
Just in the corner?
Well, you sort of flew through the air after he had hit you, and you ended up in the corner. My brother seemed to be quite a problem at times. I have no strong recollections of what he was doing wrong, but he seemed to be quite a problem at times, and he got more than his fair share of a hiding, I think. There were days, of course, where you were seen to be seen, not to be heard, and you only heard when you were asked to be heard. That was it. And my dad was, many ways, is pretty easygoing, but if you stepped out of line, you found out about it very quickly.
And did you have sort of definite rules? Did you know what the rules were, and what would happen if you broke them? You know, was it sort of were there things
nothing was categorically stated, I don't think. But you knew if there were guests in the place, you could be there, but you didn't talk unless you were asked an opinion or asked to say something. You went through the usual pleasantries, and that was it. You knew you had to be indoors by a certain time. If Mum called, you came. If you didn't, you would soon find out about it. You would go messages. That was expected of you. You might get a bonus of a penny to buy a lolly, something like that. But apart from that, no, it was just pretty well accepted what you had to do, and you knew your place.
Were you expected to contribute toward the family in any way?
You had your chores. I remember every Wednesday night, every shoe in the house would be dragged out and polished. It was like a chain game. My father would put the polish on, I would buff them, or sort of do the polish into the shoe, and my brother would buff them. And that was every Wednesday night, every shoe in the house. And Apart from messages, no, it's pretty easy going, I think.
Were you expected, like, to get jobs like as paper boys or collect bottles and that money go to the family or anything? Or
No. We're encouraged, as I got into my, say about 12 to 14, we're encouraged to go out and get a bit of a job. I know when I was about 14, my father arranged with a local paper shop in Crown Street that before going to school at Cleveland Street I would go up to pick up all the lottery application forms, take them down to Barrack Street, leave them there, go to school, come back in the afternoon, pick up the tickets, take them back to the paper shop. For that each I got a penny a ticket, which is a lot of money in those days.
yeah, that would have been a good job.
Oh yeah, it was pretty easy going. I liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, we weren't expected to contribute money to the family.
Oh, so, and you got to keep that money?
Oh yes, that was my pocket money. That was pretty good going. Generally speaking, just that my parents provided everything for us.
Well, what did the family do for fun?
In earlier days, an outing, a walk down to the Domain on Sunday, around the Botanical Gardens. Fortunately, where the big police station is down in Golden Street now, was a big open paddock at the time, and occasionally a circus would come by, like Bullen's Brothers or Worth Circus. That was big time. And by helping out, doing odd job chores around the place, you could get in to see some of the circus. Or if you couldn't get the odd job chores and you certainly didn't have the money, then you'd sort of get under the tent and sort of make yourself as inconspicuous as possible. That's a good part of it.
What did you do to, odd jobs would you do at the circus to get in?
I carry buckets or sweep areas around some of the animals, like the elephants and so on. You wouldn't be allowed to get too close, of course, but the trainers would, or the handlers would get all the straw out from around their feet and put them in a pile, and you'd be able to pick that up and then just take it wherever you're told to. It wasn't a great deal we were allowed to do, but they realised that kids didn't have much money at that time, and they made it possible for you to do things, which was quite good. Yeah.
And when you went down to the Domain and the gardens, did you go and listen to any of the speakers?
Yeah, I can remember being with my father quite a lot and being put up on his shoulders, because standing around listening to a speaker sprouting politics in those days wouldn't be all that interesting to kids. And you'd start to fidget, and one way of stopping your fidgeting was be put up on your father's shoulders and told to be quiet. Simple as that. But
can you remember any of the more eccentric speakers? Any stand out in your mind?
Not specifically, no. I don't recall any names there, but I do remember watching these guys up on ladders or boxes spruiking, and I don't really remember much about them, but they would have been around about 42, 43 thereabouts, I would think. About 7 or 8 years old.
And what other things would the family do as a sort of recreational sort of?
Dad was a keen, liked to swim a lot, and often took my brother and me to places like Bondi or Bronte. One of his favourite places was Bronte. Down to the main baths, which is now the Boyd Charlton pool, but then those days it was a tidal pool. And we spent a lot of time down there. It was a big pool, and gradually got involved in the swimming club down there, and got a bit of coaching. I'm talking here around about when I was about 7 or 8, and then I drifted away from that. And as far as the family was concerned, I suppose I spent most of my time going to baseball games with my father, which I liked. I enjoyed the games.
Where were these games at?
Let's see, Petersham Oval was very popular, Waverley Oval. I can't remember if there was, Marrickville seems to stick in my mind a bit, but I can't remember if there was an oval at Marrickville. I can't remember that. And also over at, what's the name of that park, over at Wentworth Park. I used to play some games over there as well. But primarily Petersham and Waverley seem to be the big ones.
What would you do typically in the evening? What would...
Come home from school, be allowed to go out until about 4:30 in the afternoon. Play marbles, play a bit of cricket in the lane. Cricket was sort of a bat and a tennis ball and a garbage bin stuck in the middle of the lane. And Round about 4:30, come in for listen to the radio serials.
And what were the serials that you
Let's
listened
see. Search for the Golden Boomerang, Biggles, Martin's Corner. They're the ones that seem to stick mostly in my mind. I can remember being here in school holidays when my mother would stop home with us and listen to serials such as The Lawsons, for example. That was big time. Episode 2,786,000 or something, that seemed to go on forever because I remember listening to it here when we go down to my grandmother's place on the farm. That was always a must. I think it was around about, would have been 1 o'clock it would come on. And they only had a battery radio at the time during my childhood. My grandfather would switch on the radio to listen to the news at midday and about 6 or 7 o'clock at night. My grandmother would switch it on at 1 o'clock to listen to the Lawsons, and that was it. You want to listen to the radio? Forget it. Here in the city, of course, we ran off just the ordinary power and you could listen to it as much as you liked, but in the country, no. Not in those early days.
Who controlled the finances in your family?
As far as I can gather, it seemed to be pretty much my mother and father. I can remember them sitting down at the kitchen table, sorting out the bills, sorting out how much money they had, what was going to get paid and what wasn't, trying to figure out how much they could pay to the local shop down the corner and how much they could get away with in order to carry it over to the following week when the money would come in again. I can remember on occasions there was not enough money, and at that time the gas box would be rattled. And pennies had taken out of that to help pay a few other bills. That used to be exciting. I suppose it was my introduction to when things were essential, anything goes.
Yeah. Can you describe your mother's working day?
I don't remember too much about it. I didn't know anything about her factory life. As far as I remember, it was just she'd go to work. She'd put me into a kindergarten initially down in Riley Street there. I can never get over being abandoned by my mother, but anyway. I'd be hanging onto the chain wire fencing and watching her go down the street, and that's where I'd be hanging on when she came back mid-afternoon. But I don't know much about her factory time. When she was working as chef in the Prince Alfred Hospital, I went out there a few times. By that time I was about 12, 13, 14 thereabouts. And I just have these impressions of great big dining rooms and great big kitchens with huge vats. I was usually there at a time when there wasn't too much activity. And no, apart from that, I can't remember too much about her day.
Can you remember if she liked her work at IXL and in the factories?
I don't think she enjoyed it too much. It was just something you had to do in order to get money. And she had a very limited education from country schools, and she just didn't have much in the way of qualifications to do anything.
Did your dad like his work?
Yes, loved it. He could have done, with the certificates he had, he could have gone much higher than what he did, but he just loved working on his own, being in a crane, sitting on top of a building. Just loved it. And I got to visit him a lot when he was working on the extension of the dental hospital, which was roughly around about 1948, 49, 50 thereabouts. And I was going to Cleveland Street School at that time, and after school I would quite often walk up the steps, which still didn't have a side wall in it at the time, and just go and visit him up there. But he just loved working in the cranes. It was just away from everything, and he was pretty much his own boss to do as he liked.
Well, how did the World War II affect your father?
Well, he was, I don't quite remember whether he was actually working there at the beginning of the war or he was soon moved there at the beginning of the war because of his skills.
Is that Cockatoo Island?
Cockatoo Island.
Yes.
I don't really know how he actually got there, but from what I can gather, it just seemed to be a lot of work, a lot of serious work, but a lot of fun as well. And his, the few little snippets of stories I can remember of repairs being done on American ships especially, but the occasional Australian ship that had been damaged in the combat somewhere, and also just a lot of activity.
Mm.
And I remember going to the launching of one of the corvettes over there, and I was just, my memories are essentially just everything was big. Just a big situation, and the ship sliding down the slipway after being hit by this bottle, and I was in a position down at the edge of the slipway where I could just see it happening. And I remember it was just raining all day. Simple as that.
Mm.
But Dad seemed to have seemed to enjoy the war years to a large extent. He we get the ferry across from Circular Quay. One big story that sticks in my mind is that he went racing for it and made a leap and missed it and ended up in the harbour. And another one where he spent a lot of time, there was apparently a lot of hotels down around Circular Quay area, and with his workmates he'd spend time going from one hotel to the other and then ultimately get home. And for him it was good times.
Mm. What about your mother? Did the war have any impact on her?
Not greatly. I think I remember a lot about coupons. I remember taking coupons to get some of the groceries and so on, the few groceries that are available. At that particular time in the early 40s, she was working, as I said, in the American Club down in Pitt Street. No, I don't remember too much about what she did in the actual war years, apart from working at the American Club and just having a lot of people here during the war years that were mostly Americans.
Mm. How did people like the Americans? What was the general attitude toward them? Oh, stop. What was the attitude toward the Americans?
What I saw here, they were very popular in the house here, and with people around the place, because they always had chocolates, they always had lollies, they always had clothing. They had everything. I remember with one or two of the Australians who were servicemen at the time would be back here on leave. They seemed to be very popular. But I heard occasionally, when the Americans weren't around, that perhaps they weren't too popular. It's just some of my dim recollections that there was that attitude that they always had too much, or more than what the Australians had. And apart from that, no, I don't remember too much about that.
Well, about the war, what was the general feeling? Were people afraid? I mean, the Japanese sank that ferry.
Mm. I remember that particular night. I only in retrospect do I remember, because I remember hearing loud bangs going, and I remember the next morning my mother telling me that she heard it too, and she was getting very upset about it. And I said to my father, "What should we do?" He said, "Just roll over and go back to sleep. Forget it." That he had dug out in the backyard. He had dug a air raid shelter. I guess it would have been roughly about 41, 42 in that period, which turned out to be a bit of a disaster because it's all clay around here, and when it rained, it just filled with water. And I can remember the shelf that he put in there with candles on and matches, almost being submerged by all this water. It was just filled up totally with water, and it was quite interesting. We had a peach tree in the yard that was against the fence, and when he had dug out all the area for the air raid shelter, that he had almost covered this peach tree, and it's always bore fruit every year. It was almost totally submerged by clay. Yeah. But I guess they were they were worried about it, because we had an air raid shelter, and a few people around here had air raid shelters in their yard. So I guess they were expecting something.
But there was no thought of packing up and moving to the hills, or, once...
Not that I'm aware of, no. I do remember him talking to my mother about people, it's a good time to buy property at Bondi, because people were selling off their places very quickly, or as cheaply as they could, to get out of it and get something out of it, because they expected invasion. But I didn't witness any of that. I'm just aware of what he was saying to my mum.
And was there any sense, can you remember being afraid? Or any sense of fear or foreboding? Or?
No, for me it was a lot of fun times with the soldiers. The stories they would tell, which I have no doubt were totally exaggerated. I have no sense of fear at all about it. some of the radio serials, like the Air Adventures of the Beagles, for example, were high adventure stories, and a lot of the serials were set in wartime situations. And it was just one great pack of fun.
Well, with the Americans, I mean, they would have been then leaving here, presumably, and go back and fighting. I mean, some of them must have been killed and what have you. You didn't sense anything from them that...
No, my experience with the Americans was essentially they're just a great mob of guys who were having a good time. Maybe I was too young for them to talk about it. I don't remember anything specifically about the idea of combat except the occasional mention of the Japs, and that was about it. And they talked a lot about home. I remember that aspect of it. Talked a lot about home. And some Americans my parents got very friendly with. I know they were killed somewhere in the Pacific, but I had no idea.
Can you remember many deaths in the war in the neighbourhood of people, people's fathers or brothers, or even some of these Americans? Do you remember getting messages like that? Was there a sense of avoiding the telegram boy, for example?
Not around here, not that I remember. There are a number of people who were in the services around here, but most of them survived. I think all of them survived that I knew. I remember seeing some of them in uniform, elder brothers of my friends at my age, and I do remember one guy who lived 2 houses down. We were coming back from the shop. He bought us some ice cream. This is my friend Kevin, and his oldest brother had been up in, I gather, New Guinea. And as we were walking to the corner, suddenly he flattened himself against the wall, and we just sort of looked, and he sort of peeked around the corner, and I learnt later that he's just used to being in the jungle, and you just didn't walk around a corner. It just simply was too dangerous. And I suppose that would be one of the few experiences I ever had of what the war was like for people, although I didn't really understand it at the time to any great extent. But the telegram boy that I've read about, I don't recall ever seeing.
Yeah. What would be a typical meal in your family?
Stew, Irish stew. My mother made a great Irish stew. In about the mid-40s, every Friday night treat was to go down to a pie shop, which was down in opposite the almost opposite the Old Mark Foyers in Elizabeth Street, and buy 2 great big steak and kidney pies, and have that with mashed potatoes and peas. That was great. I always remember that. And occasionally we were able to take a billy down to the local Chinese restaurant and get a billy full of soup, short soup usually. That was a big treat.
What was the local Chinese restaurant?
There's one down Oxford Street, just near the corner of Pelican Street there. That was the main Chinese restaurant in this area at that time.
There wouldn't have been many, were there?
No. Not that I'm aware of. There were, of course, down in Chinatown, which is still pretty much Chinatown now, but the one we would go to would be down in Oxford Street. And that was a big night out.
Did you actually go out to restaurants to eat?
Not very often. That was a big treat. And that was rare. Most meals were at home for breakfast. Now I'm talking about the early 40s, essentially. Mainly bread and dripping. That was still very much the go for breakfast, and lunch, peanut butter sandwich maybe, a cup of tea, or usually milk. And again, milk was a big treat because we used to get it at school. You had these crates of milk delivered once each day, and you used to get it wasn't actually a half pint, it was smaller than a half pint of milk that was considered to be good for kids at the time.
Did you like it?
Oh yes, that was a big treat. And I'd experienced milk on my grandfather's farm a lot, and that was straight from the cow, so that was good fun. And the evening meals, I suppose, essentially Irish stew or mashed potatoes and some peas, essentially that.
Was there much variety in fruit and veg around then?
Not a great deal of fruit. When I was getting around about 8 to 10 years old, I would think, walking down to Paddy's Markets, which was very much a fruit market at the time, just to pick up specks of fruit which had been put aside or thrown away by the fruiterers, and that was a good time. I can remember picking out on a huge watermelon at one time with a friend of mine down there one Sunday afternoon. The area was almost totally abandoned, and we were just sitting on the footpath just enjoying this big watermelon.
Yeah.
But that was a treat. You know, fruit wasn't a big item at the time. It was about it.
And was it mostly seasonal, or would the stuff be imported? Like, you know how you can get anything any time of the year now.
Yeah.
Was that the case then?
Fruit, I think it probably was seasonal. Again, fruit wasn't a big item. You want to cut there?
Kids in the neighbourhood?
Around this area, this top part of Ann Street, probably about 15, maybe 20.
Oh.
Most families seem to have a minimum of 2 kids. There was an Irish family just down Raleigh Street that had about 6 or 7.
You mentioned an Irish family down the street.
Yes, the Maloney family. As far as I remember, they had about 5 kids, I think. I went to school with one of them, Liam. But most families seem to have about 2 to 4 kids mainly. And we just grew up as a group around here. All went to the same school virtually, except the Catholic kids tend to go to St Francis's down in Albion Street. And also the Ryans, their kids went down to the Catholic school. The rest of us went to the state school up here in Crown Street.
Was there any rivalry between the Crown Street kids and the ones from St Francis's?
Not particularly, no. We just couldn't wait to get out of school and get around and have a game of cricket or marbles or whatever.
So there was no Protestant-Catholic rivalry or sectarianism at that time?
I don't remember it specifically, but I do remember my father talking about it on occasions, about the bloody tykes, and which didn't go down too well with my mother because she had a Catholic upbringing and she still had some links with that, even though she was by this time more agnostic than anything under the influence of my father. But no, I don't recall any great problems, but I think there was something there that was more for the adults than the kids.
Yeah. Would you say your mother was happy?
I think so, yeah. She seemed to go a lot of places with my father. I think those were the times when a wife just went where the husband wanted her to go. And she was very much a sports-minded person, so that seemed to have gone well. She liked to dance a lot. And my father also liked dancing, and they went to, as I said, to a lot of balls, and they seemed to have a great time. Yeah.
And your father was happy?
Yes, I think so. They like most people, they had their differences on occasions. I do remember my mother bouncing a saucepan off my father's head at one time. She didn't realise that she'd actually caught him until the next morning she felt the lump. I remember sitting watching all this, thinking, what's going on around here? I suppose, like everyone else, they had their differences from time to time. But for the most part, they seem to have been pretty happy.
Yeah. Okay, now who were your friends in the neighbourhood?
Mostly kids my age. Round the corner from here was Basil and Colleen Marr. I went to school with both of them, and Bobby Locke, and his sister Clarice was a bit older than us, so she was a bit out of our age group. And Liam Maloney, who's down the street, and Theo Belbin. It was a strange family. It was one of the few houses I didn't actually go into, whereas most other kids, you're always in and out of each other's house all the time. And the Joneses just up in the next corner, they were 3 girls. Kevin Ryan was my age, but his older brothers were in the services. And
did you know Kevin Ryan from Paddington?
Well, he lived at Willara at one time,
yes,
before he was killed, yes. You knew him?
No, he's still alive. The Kevin Ryan
Oh, not
I know.
the Kevin Ryan, no. The Kevin Ryan I know was killed in a motorbike accident. He was about 18.
Right.
So, but it's a fairly common Irish name, I would think.
Yeah.
And one very close friend of mine who developed some form of spinal disease. Lived down at the end of the lane here, Laurie Sullivan, and he developed some sort of spinal disease, and I used to spend a lot of time with him when I was around about 10 to 12, and just playing games with him and just talking with him. And ultimately he died, which he would have only been about 12 to 14 thereabouts.
When he died?
Very sad.
Did he become crippled?
Yes, he became bedridden, and I don't really know the nature of his disease, but he became bedridden, and I just used to spend a lot of time with him. We were good friends.
What sort of games would you play?
Oh, things like snakes and ladders, Monopoly, drafts, that kind of thing. Ludo, that kind of, just read books or listen to the radio. Very, very limited things, but we had got a lot of fun out of them. I often wonder with all the things kids have today, why they're so bored.
Yes. Well, what did you do with your friends? I mean, there were those games that you played. And what about your other friends?
Most of the games we played were things like marbles, cricket. Went swimming a lot together.
Where would you swim?
Mostly down to the main baths, because we could walk down through Woolloomooloo along Riley Street. You didn't stray too much from Riley Street. And down to what was the main baths then, over at Woolloomooloo. We weren't very much into ball games like tennis and things like that. I don't think I even saw a tennis racket until I was about 14. Bit of handball, or what they called brandings at the time, where you would just have a tennis ball and the object was to hit as many people as you could and not be hit yourself. And that was an interesting experiment at times. There were very few games, but there used to be the main one. Oh, yeah, also things like Cocky Laura. I don't know if you might remember that. It's a sort of game where a group would be in the middle and there'd be groups on either side of the street, and you'd be running back and forth, passing each other in the middle, and then finally, if people were not caught up in the middle, those who were caught in the middle were the ones who missed out, and they were out of the game. And there was another game, sort of hidings. That's right, hidings was another game where a person would put their head and bury their face so they couldn't see where everyone was going, and count to 50 or 100 or whatever, and everyone would have to hide. And then it was a game where you had to find people before they could get what they call the whippy, which was the place where that person was hiding his face while they was counting. And anyone who could get there meant that you were in again, and you had to go through the whole routine again until you finally reached the stage where you found everybody before they could actually get to the what they called the whippy at the time. It was good fun.
Yeah. Can you remember any adventures that you had?
Adventures. Getting kicked in the backside for being under the circus tent. That was an adventure. That was an interesting one. Going around through Waverley Cemetery one time and down the cliffs at what was essentially between Bronte and Tamarama at the time. Getting caught in the ledge there, and ultimately being helped up by a few fishermen. Adventures. Push bike riding. When we was about 14, we actually rode all the way to Paramatta and back. That was quite an adventure. Just the sheer experience of going that far from home on a bike was good fun. And one of the other exciting things was riding around Centennial Park on your bike, because you could ride from here to Centennial Park with really no problems at all from traffic. There wasn't too much in the way of traffic around.
Well, generally, how free were you to roam? It sounds like you went down to the Domain, you went to Centennial Park. Did you have a lot of freedom?
A lot of freedom. As long as you were home at the time you were expected to be home. And as long as you didn't get into trouble. Like, you could go down to the stores, Woolworths, Buckingham's. That was an adventure that I just dimly remember, but a lot of it's brought back by things my mother said, where Kevin Ryan and I, we used to go down to Buckingham's corner of Riley Street and Oxford Street, and busk for money during the war years.
Doing what?
Oh, just singing songs, you know. What are all the oldies of what we see as the oldies now. And they used to have in the basement of Buckingham's store, they used to have sing-alongs People used to go down there and buy things to help the war effort and that kind of stuff, and just have general sing-alongs. Another good place to get money was from the Americans was down in the Hyde Park Memorial Pool, where the War Memorial Pool in Hyde Park South there. And you simply wade through the water, and the Americans would throw coins in, and you just pick them up.
Oh, really?
That was pretty good pocket money. And occasionally the police would come along and shift you along, but for the most part you're left alone.
Were there many kids down there?
I don't remember too many being there, but I know myself and 3 or 4 mates, we used to do it quite regularly. And my mother used to sort of sound off a bit at us, and how much did you get? Yeah, it means I don't have to give you 6pence pocket money anymore this week because you got quite a killing. So we soon learn to keep our mouths shut. And you got the pocket money as well.
Yeah. Were there any places that you were not allowed to go?
Never into hotels. Never into the school on weekends, which was a bit of a temptation because it was a big open area and we sort of knew the place from going there during the day, during the week. And that was always a bit of a temptation. Climbing the fence into the waterboard, which had these long bars with spikes on the top, which made it quite a hazardous thing to get over. And I had the misfortune once of actually slipping and jamming one of the spikes in my leg and then being carted off to St Vincent's Hospital by a very angry father and getting a few stitches in my leg over that one.
Mm.
And
but why would you want to go in there? What did they have in there?
Nothing. It was just a forbidden area. There's nothing in there. Just to go in there as part of the adventure, I guess, and occasionally being chased by one of the workmen there. And that's how I happened to slip the time that I did. That I was in a hurry trying to go over the fence and just slipped, and that was the end of it. Mm. Got to impale myself in this spike and then being carried off to the hospital.
Ooh, sounds painful.
My memories aren't too vivid about it, but I remember the stitches were very painful because they didn't freeze it. they said they could hear me up on the 5th floor of St Vincent's. It was good fun. Mm. And once I fell out of the tree in the Crown Street school, again I came home and I was crying, and I was asked why I was crying, and I foolishly said why I was crying, and my father gave me an extra one for being there. Backhanded, so you weren't supposed to be in the first place. So, so you tend to shut up about things like that and wait until you finished crying before you came home. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what about people that you had to avoid? Were there any people that you had to stay away from?
There's one big guy. For some reason, he took a dislike to me, and I only knew him as Bob. Big Bob. Every time I ever came across him, he used to thump me. I don't know why. And I just used to cop it. So if I saw him coming away, I quickly went the other around the corner and kept running.
And how old was he?
I guess he would have been, I would have been about 8 or 9 at the time. He would have been about 15, something like that.
Just a kid?
Just a kid. He just didn't like me. I quickly learned to not like him. Don't know why, but anyway. Mm.
Did you like school?
It varied. My first vivid recollection of school is the day my mother took me up to, would have been infants, I suppose. And the teacher hanging on to me, my mother walking away. I can still remember her vividly, walking down the long playground towards Crown Street and the teacher hanging on to me and me screaming. I can remember it as clear as anything, being abandoned by my mother again. Primary school was a lot of fun. A lot of my mates from around here. They were all in the same class, went through school together. I didn't work too hard at school. I think my biggest achievement was coming about 5th or 6th in 6th class. My parents always thought I had a lot of potential, but I was only interested in sport at school. At Crown Street, the year I was going to go into the first year, they finished the junior secondary at Crown Street for the boys, and they shipped us off to Cleveland Street. And I was always in the lowest class. I didn't like school there. After first year, they said, well, you don't really have any linguistic ability, so we won't pursue languages. We'll put you into tech drawing and woodwork and business principles. I was hopeless at tech drawing, almost as hopeless at woodwork. And business principles seemed to make a bit of sense, but who cares? I was only interested in the swimming carnivals coming around each year. And apart from that, it was just good fun hanging out with my mates, you know. But when I went into fourth year, I went to Randwick High School, and that began to get a little more serious. And the work was beginning to pile up, and I didn't like homework. I preferred to come out and play cricket at home or go swimming. And at that time I was beginning to swim quite successfully, competitively. And by the time I'd reached state finals, and it was beginning to show a bit of promise. And I always represented the school in the inter-school swimming meets, and even at the All Schools Carnival in 1951-52, I represented the state schools against the private schools at that carnival. So with people like John Hendricks and Johnny Devitt and so on. And John Hendricks was anchor man in the 4 by 50 metres relay, and I was the start, and we had 2 or 3 others from Randwick who were also on that team. So it's good fun. And my father wanted me to stay on and finish my leaving certificate at the time. I waited for the swimming carnival to be over, and then I left. Signed myself out. When my father found out about it, fortunately my mother had softened the blow somewhat, and he said, all right, you get out and get a job. And there was a place just across the road which was made displays for shops. And I worked there for a couple of months, and I worked for a couple of months in a factory, and I didn't like that. And my father, through some of his connections, got me a job as a clerk in the city council at the town hall in Sydney. And that's where I stayed until about 1961. From 1952 to 61. Indeed, there's actually on television now one of my co-workers there at the time, Norm Coburn, in Home and Away. He's one of the actors there on that program now. Norm went to England, got involved while we were at, working in the town hall, as clerks together, junior clerks together. He got involved in acting, and he was considered to be the Ponce in the office at the time. He wasn't looked upon too favourably. It was a big joke at the time. It turned out to be quite successful. Went to England and did quite well, the Old Vic and that kind of thing. And next thing I hear, he's back here on the TV. So every time I happen to watch it on television, I just say, hi Norm, you know. It's good fun.
Yeah. Let's see. How did the teachers treat you at school? I know you didn't like it, but that much. What were the teachers like?
Teachers were generally fair. There was one woman I had in 5th class, Mrs. Scott. She was a bit of a rugged tyrant. I can, again, vividly remembering when she was keeping us in occasionally. It was one of those portable classrooms, those wooden ones. And some kid would run out the door, so she'd go to the door and chase him, we'd go out the window. And cop it the next day, but that was all part of the game, I guess. A woman I had in 3rd class, Mrs. Frew, she was a very sweet lady, as I remember, very, very nice person. The male teachers tend to be quite rugged. If you're in trouble, you knew it. Yeah, that was quite good.
Was there much corporal punishment?
Once in a while in primary school. Junior secondary at Cleveland Street, it was a fairly common thing, the cane. I quickly learnt not to get into trouble because I didn't like the cane. It hurt, and but it was fairly common in junior secondary. I did see it a little bit at, when I went to Randwick too, but again I was keeping out of trouble by then.
Did you have books or toys in your home?
Toys were usually of a very limited nature. Just games, very few in the way of toys that I can remember. I think the big event of my early years was being given a scooter for Christmas. A nice red scooter, and I took it out front here at the top of Ann Street to show off, and some clown pushed me, And I didn't know how to handle a thing. I just remember yelling as I was going, they not knowing how to stop, all the way down the bottom of Ann Street. Straight across Riley Street, fortunately no cars of any sort coming, and ended up right down the bottom in the gutter. It's just one of those things, I guess. That was a big thing for me.
Stop. Surry Hills, 24th of August 1995.
There's something I just remembered about games you mentioned, what sort of games we played.
Mm-hmm.
Marbles I've mentioned. Tops were a very important thing. A bit of string and a little wooden top about so big. And games that we used to develop was people would start their top spinning, and then it was up to someone with another top to try and knock as many out as they could. That was quite an exciting thing. And the idea of the games with tops was that those you knocked out after so many times you got to keep, as you did with marbles. Different games of marbles you could play either a huge ring of marbles with a bunch in the centre, or playing what they called holies at the time, where you'd have 2 or 3 holes in line, and you'd have to start from a particular point. Everyone started from the same particular line, and then you'd have to progress through each of the holes and back again. And the one who did it first got to keep the other fellow's marbles, which was, if you were good at it, it was quite a good way of doing it. Right, that was just something that came to mind while we were talking.
Yeah. Can you remember any rhymes or chants?
We're talking about the gangs earlier. There was one that sort of comes to mind about the mobs. What was it? Yeah, there's one that we had for Surry Hills. So we used to go, where the Surry Hills mob by we. The policeman came along, he grabbed us by the collar, he tried to run us in. We kicked him in the shins because the Surry Hills mob by we. Yeah, that kind of thing. It's kind of thing you used to just muck around with occasionally, but nothing specifically in relation to growing up apart from usual nursery rhymes, that kind of thing, which I think most people would have had at that time, like Humpty Dumpty. And I was very keen on stories, and I think one of the radio stories particularly, and the thing like The Search for the Golden Boomerang, where you talked about a white person looking for this golden boomerang with his friend Tuconi. These things stick very vividly. They were good times. And they're out somewhere in Central Australia, and all the adventures of that. They were the big stories that I used to go with.
What can you remember of rituals, like things that were done each year, like, say, Arbor Day or Wattle Day? Do you remember anything about those?
I remember Empire Day when I was at school. That seemed to be a big thing, and the whole school was paraded out up in, I'm talking about Crown Street now, I'm looking at the early 1940s, around about 43, 44, thereabouts.
What would you do?
Everyone was marched out into the main area in front of the principal's office, and we were given the speech was, we were addressed as a group, and then we'd have to sing, what was it? God Save the Queen was essentially the main song. Don't remember Waltzing Matilda being all that familiar. Not for the ceremonies anyway. I learnt through all the Americans that used to come to this house, I learnt a lot of American songs, like God Bless America and Home Land of the Brave, and Anchors Away, that was another good one, and Off We Go Into the Wild Blue Yonder, because Americans were always singing. And they're the songs you learn, or at least the songs I learnt. And I don't remember too many of the Australian songs. It's a bit weird. Yeah.
Can you remember anything about mass displays or physical culture and maypole dancing? Was that an element of your schooling at that time?
Not at Crown Street, as I remember. There wasn't too much of that. I remember going to a big situation at the showground.
Mm-hmm.
Must have been about 1950 thereabouts. There was a huge display. I don't really remember. It might have been Empire Day or something like that. and there seemed to be kids from everywhere. And just a big display, and lots of dancing out in the main arena by groups. And I think as a school group, we were just taken along just to see it.
And do you know what it was in aid of?
I think it was Empire Day, some sort of Empire Day celebrations or some such thing.
What about Cracker Night?
Oh, Cracker Night, that's a good one. That's a good memory, that one. We used to have, out here in the middle of Ann Street, just at the junction of Reservoir Lane here, we used to have big bonfires on Cracker Night. Skyrockets would be let off, everyone had their bungers and their tom-thumbs. That was a big ritual, and then ultimately the fire brigade would show up, and the water outlet was on the other side of the street. So we always used to sit on top of that, and the firemen would be looking around trying to find the damn thing. And there was one time there when the Surry Hills mob decided once they'd hooked up the hose, we'd run off with a hose. And a few of us got a kick in the tail for that.
When would that be? Would that be in June? Queen's birth? No, when?
Cracker Night. I don't really remember what night it was.
Was it winter or summer?
Winter, I think. Yeah, it was winter time. And Guy Fawkes Night. That was a big night.
Was that another sort of fireworks night?
That was part of Cracker Night, I think. Guy Fawkes Night.
Right.
That'd just be known as Guy Fawkes Night, and then it would be, as I remember, it was just one night a year, essentially that, and then become just Cracker Night. And I remember the night. I don't know if it was the exact night the war ended, but certainly around about that time, there was a huge bonfire out here. And people brought, I don't know where they got the tyres from, but I remember huge black billows of black smoke going up. Some effigies of Hitler and Tojo being burnt on top of it. That was all part of it. I remember that very vividly. And I remember one Cracker Night, a friend of mine, Brucey Hughes, had a pocket full of crackers, and someone dropped a lit one in his back pocket, and they all went off in his pocket, and he received enormous burns, and he was taken up to the hospital, and ultimately had skin grafts and so on. It just did enormous physical damage to him. But apart from that, for the most part, it was quite a lot of fun. Big spectaculars.
Well, what were the most look forward to times of year?
Christmas. Here in this house particularly, because frequently had a lot of country relatives coming down. In a small house like this, which could barely cater for four, we'd have maybe two families here at a time with 4 or 5 kids each. And the front veranda, that's right, it's a small place, and the kids would be bunking down on the floor here and out in the veranda overnight because it's warm enough. And in those days, the houses were never bothered. You know, you could sleep outside. Kids were never interfered with. It was always a lot of fun. Anzac Day was a big festivity. I can remember going with my father up to Oxford Street, and at that time I used to march from somewhere downtown up Oxford Street out to the showground. And I remember watching those huge parades. Early days being up on my father's shoulders, and later days wiggling through the crowd and sitting in the front on the ground watching it that way.
What can you remember at school, like radio programs? On, you know, there used to be radio programs for school, and also the school magazine.
School magazines used to come out. I remember them mainly when I was in primary school. The magazines, I'm not sure if they were weekly or fortnightly, I can't remember. They used to have poems in them, short stories were very popular. There's one line that always sticks in my mind, I don't know why. There seems to be some sort of farce, and the princess screaming out, "Eureka!" I don't know why, I have no idea, but that's a line that just remember for some reason. And they used to have songs in them, and that would be used by the classroom teacher to sing, get a sing-along going, just to another way of varying the day, I suppose. But no, apart from that, I don't remember them when I was at junior secondary or secondary school. School magazine, they were the magazines that came around. The school didn't put them out.
The education department.
Yes, the education department put them out. At junior secondary and especially at secondary high, you had the situation where the school magazines were put out. I remember at Ramakai and also Cleveland Street they had a yearly magazine of some sort.
Was there any sex education in your childhood, either from school or home?
No, only what we found out ourselves. I certainly don't remember any at school.
Can you remember hearing about abortion or unwanted pregnancies?
No. Yes, there was one occasion, one of the girls that I grew up with at my age, she was about 15 I think at the time, around about there, 14, 15, and she was taken away to a clinic for a while. But I heard that she was going to have a baby. But
And what was the attitude to that then? Was that accepted or was it a disgrace?
it was generally just something that was accepted, you know, it just happened to her. I don't remember it being sort of a disgraceful thing, that everyone looked down at her, that she was a dreadful girl or something like that. Again, adults may have, but around kids it was not very much talked about. Amongst ourselves, it was a bit of a curiosity more than anything. You know, where'd you get it? You know, there's no bushes around here. Where'd you get the baby from? But
Did she keep that baby?
no, it was aborted. But we knew that she was going to have a baby, and to us it was just, wow, you know, how is this possible? And she didn't talk much about it, as I recollect, but she it was just an item of curiosity more than anything.
Was it widely known that she had it aborted? Because by then it would have been illegal, so I'm quite...
Oh yeah, it was, well, I don't know specifically it was illegal, but I'm sure it was, yeah, at that time.
Okay, well let's talk about the neighbourhood generally. Would you describe it as residential or industrial or mixed?
Mixed more than anything. It's a factory area generally. Houses, a lot of the houses around here were essentially, like this house for example, was essentially erected as a worker's house. It's very small. Most of the houses around here are two-storey, but again very narrow frontages. And the backyards are very small, especially along the Reservoir Lane area and Mackey Street. Reservoir Street itself seemed to have two stories mainly, and most of the houses were fairly substantial for this area. Most compared to most other suburbs, I guess they were still very small, even though they were two-storey. Factories were always the go. I can remember Gadsden's factory down the bottom of the hill. They're long gone now, but they used to, it was a cannery more or less. They used to make tin cans, and it was always noisy. Oh, that's the big recollection I have, always noisy. You watch these cans running through the races all the time. And being told by the bloke around there who'd spot us, get away, you know, bugger off you kids, you're not, don't come in here. There's another place that made tubular steel, like tubular steel beds and so on. It was just down the corner here, which is now a gymnasium. And I can still remember watching fellows using those not welding sticks. And they were watching them, those big masks, and always wondering why they had these masks on. And I was talking to my mum about it one day, and he said, no, you don't look at those lights, they hurt your eyes. Which I guess they would have. Yeah, but essentially an industrial area with houses, which were mainly for people who could get to transport easily to get to work, and you had trams here, just one block away, and 5 minutes walk to Central Station for people who had to work elsewhere.
Did most people work locally?
I'd say it was pretty well split. A lot of people seemed to work in factories around the area, and others seemed to go quite some, well, what to us were distances at the time, like places like Redfern or Camperdown or factories out in those areas.
That was considered a distance?
Yeah, that was considered to be quite some way, or even Mascot, areas like that, Alexandria. That was quite a way. Because the only way you could go was by tram. And that kind of transport was slow, fairly efficient as I remember, but that's about the only way you could get there.
Mm. What was the social focus of the area?
Probably the occasional festivity down at St Francis School Hall.
What do you mean? What would happen?
The Catholic Church used to put on an occasional housing night. I don't know too much about that because it was a time that I was too young to go. But I remember my mother and a lot of her friends from around here going to housing and talking a little bit about it. The boys, for the kids my age, essentially were the boys' brigade down along Riley Street towards Devonshire Street there. The Police Boys Club. Don't recollect having too many things for girls.
Mm.
They just don't seem to be included. Don't know why.
Mm.
Anyway.
Was there a place where people would meet to talk informally, a favourite sort of place, a pub or corner shop or anything like that?
The men used to go up to Martin's Corner on the corner up here at Campbell and Crown Street. That was a very favourite pub for the locals. The women I was aware of tended to congregate on the corner of Mackey Street at Mrs Jones's place, and the women from all around here would just be sort of backyard over the fence situation, although it was all around the front veranda there. Mm. And that used to be for the women essentially the focal area to meet every day and just have a yarn. Yeah, but again, it didn't seem to be that the women would be too often out with the men during the day or the afternoons, but occasionally I did hear of women going with their husbands or whatever or their boyfriends to a lounge or a ladies' bar or something like that in the local pub.
Mm.
But that was out of my reach.
Yeah. What was the ethnic mix?
Here was pretty cosmopolitan. I can remember Aboriginal kids here, Greeks, Italians, Chinese. One fellow I got very friendly with, a Chinese boy who lived down in Campbell Street, Harry Keck. And I remember the first time I went down to his place one afternoon after school, and he took me home. And I remember being as much a curiosity to his mother as she was to me. And I can still remember the curious smells, what I consider to be curious smells. And it was quite an experience, but I didn't go there very often because his mother had no English. And I don't recall ever meeting his father. And some Greek boys, brothers that lived up in Campbell Street, up above Crown Street there, going to their place a few times. But it was pretty cosmopolitan bunch around here.
And did everybody mix well in the schools? Was there any sort of discrimination?
Not that I'm aware of. Most people just sort of mixed in together. And I think from my personal point of view, that was a very important part of my life because it made me very open-minded about people and all their backgrounds. I can remember my wife saying when I first started going out with her, she was Latvian. And she'd come out after the war, and she and her parents, and had some very bad experiences at the hands of Australians. And they considered me quite a curiosity as an Australian, that I was like foreigners. And I think that had a lot to do with my upbringing around here. It was a pretty mixed upbringing.
Where did most people work?
Mostly in factories. Jack Lamont, Mr. Lamont, he was worked on the tramways. He was a tram conductor. Most of the women seemed to work in factories of one sort or another. I don't remember people of my mother's vintage being anything else other than working in a factory or working in what was essentially a domestic situation, washing floors, scrubbing floors, or cleaning clubs or something like that. Most of the men, apart from Jack Lamont, seem to be electricians or work in factories of one sort or another.
What smells can you remember?
Around here? The different types of food more than anything. Like, there are a lot of Australian kids around here, but also, as I said, it was quite mixed. And The Greeks had quite different smells. What they were at the time I don't know, but I've since come to learn that it had a lot to do with things like calamari and that kind of stuff. But how they cooked in those days, I have no idea. But the Italians' spaghetti was always flavoursome and smelly. And I suppose, well, in the Chinese, when I went down around Harry's place occasionally, that was very different. But as far as factories were concerned, not much in the way of smells around here. There were no outlets for chimneys apart from the waterboard, but that was not very big. Oh, the other place was, of course, the Crown Street Women's Hospital. They had burn-offs every so often, and when the wind blew from the south, it would come down this way, and there was quite a stench, as I remember.
Mm. Was it a safe neighbourhood?
Yes, very much so. I can remember the back gate always open during the day. At night, it was only closed at night with a slide bolt on, never padlocked. My house now, I have bars on every outlet. I can remember the back door, if we went to the pictures as a family on a Friday night, perhaps up to West's, the key was put under the mat and the gate was just closed. Mm. That was it. Kids, for the most part, were never interfered with. It was free and easy come and go. Mm. And I can never remember at any time during my childhood a place being robbed around here. Mm. Now it's pretty well open. Mm. You know, everything's locked, dogs are in the yards, bars are on windows and gates. It's totally different now.
Mm. Well, can you remember any local crimes?
Down the bottom of Ann Street, there was, what was his name, Tiger Hayes or something? I can't quite remember now. I didn't know him, of course, but I knew of him. Chow Hayes, yeah. He was used to hang out around the bottom of Commonwealth Street and Ann Street, down around that area. And I didn't know them, but I was aware of them and hearing about them. There were brothels down in the lane just off Campbell Street, between Reservoir Street and Campbell Street. That was always fun to walk down around there and just look around. Of course, you had the brothels in Palmer Street, which is about 3 blocks from here, and you're always aware of. Occasionally, you would stray from Riley Street, coming back from the swimming at the main bars, and walk up around there, because these were notorious areas that always held a fascination for kids, I suppose, but you didn't really know what it was about. And apart from that, no. I think I only heard of one actual murder, which apparently was a gangland situation, up in Palmer Street one time. Mm. It's something I never heard of. Mm. But didn't mean to say it didn't happen, just that as a kid I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah, so you weren't aware of SP betting?
My dad did SP betting for a while.
Oh, did he?
I can remember my mother standing at the gate calling out to me. I was only standing outside the gate and I couldn't understand why. And then a few years later I discovered there was a bell at the top of the gate post, a buzzer. Mm. And apparently at that time the police were coming around, walking around, and they were strangers in the neighbourhood. And she was supposedly calling me to come in, when in actual fact she was pressing the buzzer to let Dad know and to get everything off the table, and that all his friends are playing cards or something. That kind of situation, because my dad had been quite a knockabout guy in his early years, and he was into anything where he could make $1. He used to go down to the Tomo's 2-up school. He used to work there at nights to make a few extra shillings.
Well, what can you tell me about that?
Not a great deal, but only things I heard him and Mum talking about, that the police are on the take. At that time, on the take? What do you mean? What were they taking? But essentially it was a pretty well protected area, and he was at times a cockatoo, and I couldn't understand. I used to look at him and wonder, well, what's he like? Does he look like a cockatoo? There's no resemblance, but I can still remember looking at him and my mother saying, "Oh, you're a cockatoo tonight." And I look at him and said, "What's going on? What's this mean?" I have no idea. But he used to be involved in all that kind of stuff.
Well, who was this guy Tomo? I've heard about him.
It's a very famous two-up school that used to be somewhere down around the bottom of Reservoir Street. I don't know exactly where. And that used to be quite a big deal, I believe. And I just knew of it as Tomo's two-up school, and that's where if you had a lot of money you could go and play, or you could play as a small-time player if you wanted to. But it used to be quite a big deal, I believe.
Did you know much about Sly Grog and all the pubs used to close at 6 then, didn't they?
Yes, it was 6 o'clock closing, as I remember it, into the 50s, and if you knew the right people, as my father inevitably did, he could always get access to bottles of drink, or he could spend time with his mates after the doors had closed with a publican whom he always seemed to know. And there was, as I recall, he used to get quite a lot of liquor from the Americans too. That's why parties were always here. There's always gay times here with the liquor that the Yanks used to bring in.
Okay. Can you remember any really big events that we haven't covered?
Oh, the end of the war and the big bonfire, that was a big special thing. Much later in my years, when I was going to university, I was married at the time, and to get to the libraries earlier, I used to see with my mother, and on a Friday night, and go to the libraries early Saturday morning. And I remember quite specifically my mother coming out and waking me that Kennedy had been shot. I remember that very vividly, and I thought at that time, all hell's going to break loose, but it didn't. And I suppose another big event would have been the early 50s, watching television in the store windows. That was really something to see. The big, watching, walking along George Street, for example, seeing Palmer's window TV and thinking, boy, that's really something. And going to pick up my girlfriends up here, who lived up in Paddington at the time, and stopping and just staring at the television in the window, store window, and being late. I suppose the Cuba situation, that was a big deal. And everyone thought, well, World War III is going to break out any time now. Korea, that was, I was thinking at the time in Korea, I was still in high school at the time, and I thought I could end up going into this. And my dad wasn't too keen on the idea, because I was getting towards the age where I could get involved, but fortunately it ended by the time I got out of school. And that was something.
What about local characters? Obviously there must have been Tomo, but you didn't.
Yeah, I didn't know him. Did get to know, I'm not quite sure what he was, but there used to be a Chinese fellow come around regularly, about once or twice a week, and for some weird reason we'd always welcome him as Charlie. Don't know what his name was, no idea, but all the kids used to call him Charlie. And he would sit and talk to us, and I remember we had great difficulty understanding him, and he'd occasionally give us lollies. I guess that's why he was so popular. But the other guy that was very popular also was the guy with the ice wagon, because in those early days they didn't have refrigerators, just ice boxes, and he would come down about every second day in blocks of ice. I remember him getting blocks of ice, swinging them up on his in a Hessian bag, swinging it on his shoulder and bringing it to the kitchen, dumping it in and taking a little bit out that was left. And then he'd let us sit on the back of the wagon while he went up the lane to his next drop. He was quite a colourful character. The other guy that was very colourful was a fellow that lived in a house down on the road here. I only knew him as Jack. Had this huge truck. I guess he used to do a lot of pick-up deliveries and moving heavy equipment and so on. And he would sit and play the harmonica, mouth organ. After he came home from work, he'd be black, just absolutely black with dirt or coal dust on occasions. And you could see his white eyes virtually, and he'd just sit there and say, let's have a tune, you know, and he'd just sit down and just play the mouth organ for the kids. Yeah. One thing I also remember too is the Salvation Army. They used to come round, well now I'm talking around about early 40s. They'd come around, usually one or two women and a fellow, and they'd have their tambourines, sometimes a trumpet. They'd play usual sort of hymns, and just talk a little bit about the gospel, I suppose. I wasn't too interested in that. And they'd stand either on the corner of Mackey Street and Reservoir Lane, under the light there, or under the light here in the corner of Ann Street and Reservoir Lane. And they were always popular because they used to have a good bit of a sing-along, and they were always... The thing I remember most about the Salvation Army was that they would help... The thing that was commented about was that they would help anyone, no matter who they were. Whereas... Right?
The salvos would help anyone.
Yeah. Why that sticks in my mind is years later, when I was doing a little bit of interviewing myself, Mr. Lamont, who lived down in Mackey Street, was talking about his experiences in the Depression days. And he and his wife were Catholic, but they never went to church. And he was so angry about the Catholics because he went down to get a handout for he and his family. And they said, "You never come to church?" He said, "No, but I haven't got a job, I'm out of work, and I need food for my family." They said, "You never come to this church, so we're not going to give you anything." And from that time, like I can still remember very clearly the way that he was so angry about that. He always spoke so well about the Sullys, that they would help you no matter who you were or what you were. Mm. And I guess that's something that I've always remembered about them. Mm. Mm.
What were the main businesses in the area?
I suppose sort of mixed business shops. There's a shop down on the corner of Riley Street and Reservoir Street where we used to get most of our groceries and put things on tick because we didn't have all that much money. Most families around here didn't have much money. And they'd put things on tick, and when your parents got their wages at the end of the week, then you go and settle up. I can remember taking coupons down there in the latter stage of the war years, running messages for my mother to do that. Another mixed business was up here, Mr. and Mrs. Laurie. They're in a good position because they're right next to the school, and that's where you came on a hot summer's afternoon for ice blocks. Mm. Ice blocks were about a penny. Ice creams are a bit too expensive. They used to be about threepence halfpenny or something, but penny was ice blocks was quite affordable. Next to them was a pie shop, homemade pies and cakes, John Carlson. Mm. I got to know him reasonably well as I was growing up. But probably the best meat pies I've ever tasted. Very tasty.
Mm. What appliances did you have in the home? You mentioned before that you had ice delivered, so you would have had an ice box. What other... What appliances typically exist?
We had a stove. At first it was a fuel stove. I can remember toasting bread on the end of a long pronged fork. Or my mother doing it mostly, or my father, but mostly my mother. As years went by, probably in the late 40s, we had an electric toaster, which used to have flap out each one, and you could do 2 pieces at a time. That was a big deal. Radio we had right from my earliest memories because my father bought that for my mother as a wedding present. It was one of those big, tall standing things with just a radio dial on it and 2 knobs, volume and radio finder. That was about it. Not too much else.
Did you go on holidays?
Occasionally, not very often, but occasionally down to my grandparents' farm, and that was involved about 2.5 day trip by train from Central, leaving usually at night, getting into Griffith about late afternoon the next day, having to wait around for about 2 hours for a local train to be going out to Hillston, getting there very late afternoon. Sometimes we'd have to stay in Griffith overnight. We always had relatives there, and then go out the next day. Holidays with the family apart from that, no.
What were the most popular newspapers of the day?
In this area, mainly the Daily Telegraph, the Sun and the Mirror. They were the three distinct newspapers at the time.
What about magazines?
Photoplay. I used to buy Photoplay once a week when I went to the movies. Magazines. The People magazine. Was it called? I think it was called People. And Post. Post magazine was another one at the time.
Did you read comics?
Avidly. Superman, The Phantom, comic strips like Snake Gully, Ginger Megs. They were pretty popular at the time.
What movies do you remember seeing that you've...
Frankenstein, the Wolfman, really high class stuff like Tarzan, and all the Tarzan movies, never missed them. Dracula, cowboy movies, they were very popular in the early 40s, and occasionally the war type movie that my parents used to take me to. Don't remember any of the titles of the war ones, but Westerns, Hopalong Cassidy, Gene Autry, Roy Rogers. They were pretty much the popular things at the time.
What jokes or tricks can you remember?
Tricks. Knock down Ginger. We used to run up to somebody's door quietly and then bang on the door, then race away. Great fun. I don't know why, but it's great fun. I remember playing tricks on my parents, a group of the kids I grew up with, and we tie a bit of cotton to the knocker. It was one of those knockers on the door, metal knockers, and sitting over the other side of the street. We thought it was so clever. You just pull the knocker and then break the cotton. And Mother would come out and look around, nobody there. Did your kids see anyone? No? Innocent? No? And do the same thing again, and then being told to get the hell out of here. Yeah, we know what you're doing, that sort of stuff. That was the sort of trick we used to play. We used to play hockey in the lane with copper sticks. Mother used to use to mix the copper up with your clothes in. And I remember one time the ball went over the fence of the lady across the road there, and she wouldn't give it back. So we got a couple of tin cans out, started belting them around. She didn't appreciate that, and she suddenly came racing out the gate, and kids just went everywhere. What she's going to do to us, I don't know, but anyway, kids just went every direction. Just took off. And ultimately she did give our ball back. But she was quite a weirdo. Her husband, as I found out many years later, was a concert pianist by the name of Tanner. And he was always practicing the piano across there with all this sort of weird music, like what turned out to be Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff and so on. And to us it was just noise, rotten noise, because we were into pretty much the jazz era, I suppose, and the big band era. And that sort of music just didn't go down. Absolute garbage. No one listened to that.
Oh, gee. What major changes did you see when you were growing up?
In the city, I suppose, buildings beginning to get a bit taller. I can remember when I started to go back to night school at 4th Street School up on the hill there, at the Observatory Hill, thinking the tallest buildings around here is the AWA Tower and the Caltex building, which is about maybe 6 floors. They're the tallest buildings around that part. Now I look at what I see down there, and the huge buildings are just 20, 30 stories. The subway gradually being extended, the loop going out through to Edgecliff, which of course is fairly recent, but I was aware of the tunnels down around Central because my father, being involved with the railways at one time, was aware of these things. The transition, I suppose, from steam trains to more diesel, again, mainly because of my father, I was aware of this. And the removal of trams giving way to buses. They were big changes, I thought.
And what images, if you think back to Surrey Hills in the 1940s, what image comes to your mind? Is there any particular site that...
I think there would seem to be a lot of open spaces relatively close by. Like what is now a park down here in Albion Street was just a paddock with no real format to it. It would appear that there were buildings there at one time that had been demolished. Open spaces like Prince Alfred Park and Moore Park, Centennial Park, all these were close. The Easter show was a big occasion, and that was fairly cheap for us kids at the time. Approximately the swimming pool down at the Domain. It was a half-hour walk, but in those days you walked anyway. It was a rare situation where you went by, caught a tram down to the Botanical Gardens and walked through that.
Can you remember any common illnesses?
Yeah, when we were kids, most kids seemed to have the measles, scarlet fever, whooping cough. They seem to be pretty much the go with most kids around this area at that time.
Do you remember any deaths?
I had my friend, the boy at the end of the lane there, when he was about 12. My brother had polio when he was about 4, and fortunately it wasn't too severe a dose, and he ultimately outgrew it.
Really, what was that like? It must have been horrifying for the family.
Yes, I can remember going with my mother a few times to see him in the hospital at Camperdown. I can remember him being on a small bed outside the back kitchen door there, being there a lot. He wasn't allowed to run around or anything. Then he had these calipers put on him, and he was for a while a butt of jokes, and then kids seemed to accept it after a while.
And did he recover unscathed?
Pretty well. He's in a much bigger fall than I am.
He didn't get a limp, or?
The only thing that seemed to affect him was essentially with his toes, so pretty much like claws. But apart from that, no. I remember he was always seemed to be clumsy going down hills. He'd always fall over, and he was always had these lumps on his head where he's hit his head. It was quite a scene at the time.
Yeah. Can you remember any of the politicians of the day?
My dad was very big on Curtin and Chifley. Ben Chifley was always a popular name in this house. The man most hated was Menzies. He was considered to be the enemy of the worker, and I can remember my father listening to him on the radio and then switching on and calling him all sorts of names, which I would blush to say that I was aware of at such a tender age. And but mostly Labour names are very popular in this house.
Can you remember any election campaigns?
I can remember seeing, I don't remember names, but I remember seeing people coming around and standing on boxes or ladders and talking about the elections and talking how they were campaigning to be elected and so on. But standing under street lights, for example, around here in Surry Hills and over at Darlinghurst, in that area.
They get heckled?
Oh, it seemed to come and go, but for the most part, people seem to listen more than heckle. They seem to be listening pretty attentively because I guess they're a little more aware of the working class lot and what they had to offer for these workers. You know, the sort of people that came around here. I don't think you got too many people in the way of liberal attitudes coming around this area.
No. What impact did the car have on your lifestyle and on the area?
On me personally, none. I didn't start driving until I was about 30. There's no one around here apart from the truck driver up the lane and the woman in the house next door to whom she was part Chinese, and she had a restaurant going at the time, I believe. She had a car, and one fellow down the hill had a car, and up till about the late 1940s. And my brother had a beat-up Holden at one stage, around about the early 1950s, I think. He was driving without a licence long before he was due to actually go for a licence. He was pretty much a knockabout type of character himself in those years. At the age of 16, he was a bouncer down one of the local nightclubs down here.
What's your happiest memory?
Here in Surry Hills?
As a child?
Going to the Saturday afternoon movies. That was good fun.
Your saddest memory?
As a child. I suppose the death of my friend around about the age of 12. That was it was pretty hard to take. Him being sick for so long and then just dying. It was pretty bad.
And were you happy as a kid?
I think so. Yeah, I seem to have had a great time.
Okay. Is there anything I haven't asked you that I should have?
I don't think so. A pretty comprehensive series of questions.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to thank you.
It's been
great
my
help.
pleasure.
Thank you.
If it's helped to somebody, great.
I'm sure it will be.